The Egyptian desert, a harsh and ruthless environment where death looms around every corner. I said every corner. For some people. Hi, I'm Amon, and I'm not one of them. Welcome to the second part of the Age of Mythology Deathless series. In this one, we are focusing on the Egyptian campaign. I managed to beat the whole Greek campaign without losing a single unit, and it is my firm goal to continue doing so in this one. In the first part, we were attacked by giant kraken that were sent on us by the evil Cyclops King, but we were also attacked by giant fish, and we have to get to the bottom of that mystery in this campaign. The rules still remain the same. My units can't die, units I don't control are free to die in whatever way they want, animals don't count as units, you can call animal rescue if you want, but I'm still going to eat them. And also, my heroes can't die, even if their deaths aren't permanent. And of course, I have to play on the hardest difficulty. So, let's begin. After escaping the underworld, the first level has us digging for a large sword and defending from enemies coming from multiple sides. A defense mission in a Deathless challenge. My favorite. The enemies come from 3 valleys, so the only reasonable thing to do is make walls to stop enemies from flooding in. In the beginning, enemies come from one side at a time, so I use my initial forces to take the incoming enemies out. Later they come from multiple directions, but by then I had walls and towers set up, so I was able to defend. Then enemies start attacking with siege units, but my heroes managed to get out and deal with those. Towards the end I decided to make multiple layers of walls, cause they can buy me a lot of time to defend. And they did! Until I got a visit from a literal demigod, a son of Osiris. His lightning is deadly to regular people, but I managed to take him out using non-regular people, aka heroes. I mean, I've gotta hand it to the guy. He's even hiding behind a wall, so it's harder to target him. But eventually, he goes down. Towards the end, the enemy started attacking using solely siege units. But did you know that villagers deal additional damage to siege units in this game? Neither did I until recently, but turns out they really do. So I used the villager to attack the enemy siege units. Redefining the term worker harassment. After that, nothing really managed to put any real pressure on my defenses, so I recall all my workers to start digging the Egyptian Excalibur. I wish King Arthur was one of my heroes, then he would have just pulled the sword out at the very beginning and I wouldn't have to dig for it. But it is what it is, let's move on. The sword that we just dug up belongs to a very grouchy looking statue guy, and we had to cozy up to him by giving him the sword. After a surprisingly tricky initial segment where I had to liberate some workers, which must have been some kind of metaphor for communism and capitalism, I arrive at a village. You know how I said Age of Mythology is an awesome game because it usually lets you win by only doing the last primary objective? Well, that doesn't always have to be a good thing. There is a giant army destroying villages in the area, and I have to awaken the guardian by bringing the sword next to him. This sword, however, is carried by 2 villagers, and if they bring the sword next to him, they will mysteriously disappear, and I will just as mysteriously lose 2 supply. This means that I have to somehow face a giant army that was supposed to be destroyed by an unkillable deity, and that I have to do it without losing any units. Man, I love my life. But first, I had to make sure the game actually lets me win without awakening the guardian. And the fastest way of doing that are cheats. First, I used the cheat that lets me cast a bunch of lightning strikes on the enemy army. After that, I conjured 3 special Canadian bears to quickly scout if every enemy died. And thankfully, they did. Which means awakening the guardian is not optional, and I can use him to destroy the enemy army. That's a lot easier said than done though, but way easier than the alternative. The enemy attacks often, so I decided to make a squad of serpents to keep me safe in the early game. They hit really hard and in a cone, but they also have very low range and durability, so I needed something else to attack the enemy base. And the prime candidate was found in my next tier of units. And it's another reptilian, called the Petsush Sunlight Crocodile. The enemy has literally a billion defenders defending the base. Thankfully, the enemy can very easily be aggroed to attack, so I just bring a couple of guys and bait them into my base, where the Sunlight Crocodiles take care of the most of them. Wait a second though, I'm missing a hero. Where's Amon-Ra? Now, if you've played Age of Mythology before, this has probably happened to you at least once. Amon-Ra jumps somewhere unreachable or over an enemy wall, and she has to stay there for the rest of the game. The worst hero ever. But in Deathless, Well, let's just say she is going to have her uses. After that, I was able to reach the enemy base before they built up more units again. The enemy put a giant fort in front of the door towards the Guardian. But when one door closes, a window opens. Or in this case, a wall portion. It wasn't defended at all, so I just took it down and brought my sword bearers to the Guardian. One might say that I
came from behind.
Now it was time for the fun part. A giant godlike statue with 20,000 health and 2,000 attack. Destroying these guys might even be more fun than committing war crimes. Well, almost. Killing unarmed civilians is still the best thing. And after beating most of the army, the level is done. This brings us to what might be the shortest, but definitely not the easiest level in the entire campaign. This level starts us off with a bunch of my guys getting ambushed and killed in the middle of the map, in a cutscene. Although cutscene deaths can be prevented, there are units that are still actually alive at the beginning of the level, which means that I have to somehow make them escape the ambush that happens at the 0-second mark. Now, if we check the supply at the beginning of the level, it says I have 67 of it. There are 4 X-Men that are being ambushed, which brings us down to 59 when they die. That implies that all my dead heroes in the middle of the map start as dead, which means that I only have to get my 4 X-Men to safety. The 3 X-Men at the top can escape if I tell them to get away, but the X-Men at the bottom get surrounded almost immediately by enemies and it's game over for him. In order to save him, I have to extremely quickly select him and tell him to run away. He is being followed by a bunch of X-Men, which are as fast as him, so once I tell him to run away, he will definitely be able to escape them. The same principle applies for my 3 X-Men at the top. Interestingly enough, when the X-Men are escaping, they manage to revive my heroes, so they are able to quickly capture the cart containing a piece of the Forbidden One, which I have to return to my base. In the meantime, my X-Men reach the walls and my towers do what they do best. In the meantime, the enemy sent an attack wave from their base to defend the cart, but the game didn't expect me to be able to capture it at the very beginning, so they won't be able to get there in time. The only thing that can actually stop me now are scripted events. There are jackals that are teleported on top of me at one point, but I use my heroes to easily take them down. As a last-ditch attempt, the enemy brought a couple of bird transports, so I made priests that take down most of them before they can even land the units inside. In the meantime, I clean up the rest of the enemies and we go on to the next level. I said the last level was probably the fastest level in the game, but this one might be the second fastest. In the beginning you get a bunch of myth units and you have to assault the enemy base to distract a bunch of enemies guarding a transport boat. But this is where Miss Amonra comes into play. Since she is the only one that has to reach the docks, and the only thing standing between her and the boat is a wall, she can use her rarely useful power to jump over the wall, reach the transport ship, and get to the second part of the level. This is where I have to reach a couple of docks and build a navy to attack a prison where my friends are located. This part of the level isn't that bad, so I managed to kill the defenders of the prison and rescue my friends. And off we go to the next one. The last 2 levels were cheesed so hard and beaten within minutes that it might be time for a proper level where I actually get to build stuff. It's not going to be this one though. The goal of the first part of the level is to defend from the initial enemy attacks and then reach a base and assault the enemy island. The final goal of the level is to find a cart containing a piece of the Forbidden One and escort it out of the city. But if I already know where the piece is, do I really have to go through all that to find and escort it out? Nah, the piece is located right next to where I was actually supposed to go and it's defended with nothing but towers. So, I destroy a wall from the outside, destroy the 2 towers and start going towards the exit. The enemy actually has a very big base right next to the beach where I landed, but I don't think the enemy AI activates until I reach the base I was supposed to reach, so I just strolled towards the exit where there were a couple of towers. The enemy also spawned a few defenders in the end, but it wasn't nearly enough. And we have another huge mission which was completely cheesed into lasting a few minutes. Cheesing the last couple of levels was pretty draining, so it's time for a little nap. Even though I thought this level was going to be some kind of dream, it turned out to be a nightmare. In the first part of the level, I have to face a couple of Cyclopses and Chimeras, which are easy enough. The second part of the level though, not so much. I am given a huge army of very fragile units, and I'm supposed to destroy a couple of rocks that block my way. All enemy units are myth units here, and since I have 2 heroes, it would make sense to be able to just bait them 1 by 1 or 2 by 2 and take them out. Unfortunately, one of the two heroes is Caster, the main character's son, and he feels more like a liability than a hero. He does basically no damage, and I can't even use him as a human shield since he has no health either. I have to use the priests from the initial army, and even with them I barely make it. Then, after I start attacking the rocks, more enemies spawn, and my son proves even more useless here than in the first wave. The two Avengers that spawn here are just so strong that the only reason why I managed to beat them was sheer luck. Before that, you can see that I was so desperate that I even tried to take out the rocks with spearmen in hope of not being detected by enemies, which literally felt like watching paint dry, but it was in vain. After luckily dealing with the Avengers, another wave of enemies comes, but thankfully Zeus sees how much I'm struggling with my useless son, so he uses a lightning storm to help me out. That manages to roast most of my enemies in this segment, and I manage to get through. Oh, but we are far from done. The suffering is only beginning. For some reason, the next portion of the level makes us the bad guys, who need to destroy the enemy base. I use the heroes that I get in the beginning to take the relics that seem powerful, and then proceed to the base. In my way there is a huge enemy navy, and I need to somehow get past it. But how do I do that? Wait, Kraken? No, this feels wrong. I can't use Kraken. But the insta-kill attack. Okay, just this once, and that's it. After having become the very thing I swore to destroy, I arrive at my base. And boy do I have something to see. The enemy attacks right away, and their attacks are relentless. Thankfully, I have a bunch of strong units, and they even gave me Pigmen and the Cyclops King, who are pretty strong. They also gave me lightning statues, which are literally insane. After taking an earthquake to the face, I finally managed to stabilize. I built a couple of catapults, and with the help of my heroes, I started attacking the base. I easily take down their fort, but inside the base there is a much more difficult situation. But somehow I managed to get through, and I use my plague power to stop the enemy production, and an earthquake to stop their structures from existing. You know how I talked smack about militia in the last video? Well, turns out they heard me, and they want revenge. The earthquake destroyed so many buildings, and spawned so many militia, that I was barely able to handle them all. Then I said enough is enough, and I brought my myth unit to help, and we brought their production down. After that, I only had to destroy the enemy wonder, and we were finally able to wake up. This much intensive fighting was a bit too much though. I think it's time for another longer mission, made a lot shorter by cheesing it. On this mission, I have to reach a settlement, and then reach the center of a huge enemy island base with Aman-Ra. The key words in this sentence being reach and Aman-Ra. I hatched out a plan, built a transport ship, and sailed towards the enemy island. But just as I was approaching the coast... NANI? Giant fish. This is where they're coming from. Their reign of terror ends now. The enemy base actually has 2 fences, but Aman-Ra already demonstrated that fences aren't a problem for her. Now, I'll admit the enemy had so many forces that it was a really close call, but somehow I managed to bring her to the middle of the base. And level complete. Well done, Aman-Ra. Well done. Turns out that the hooded man is the one responsible for sending the fish after me, but now it's time to end him. Seriously? What's up with enemies escaping using animals in this game? Oh well, at least we got rid of the fish. I honestly didn't expect the next level to be quite as difficult as it turned out to be. The level starts with meeting a couple of Norse friends, for whatever reason, and we have to cut up a tree that has a piece of the Forbidden One inside it, also for whatever reason. First, I'm supposed to reach my base, but there are a couple of temples located in the desert that spawn mummies if I don't deal with them, and mummies have an insta-kill attack, so I'm definitely going after them first. I destroy the first one, reach my base, and then start building up while destroying the second temple. Everything seemed to be peaceful at first, but then attack waves start showing up, and even a couple of mummies appeared, even though I have no idea where they spawn from, since there are only 2 mummy temples on the map. But anyway, I deal with them and proceed to wall off 4 choke points where the enemy could come from. And then this happens. A huge attack wave of 30 elephants arrives, literally out of the blue. The only thing I can possibly do is use a bunch of workers to out-repair the damage done to the gate. The problem are the bunch of ranged units that are part of the attack wave, so I have to be lucky they focus on my hero and not my workers. Somehow I take them out with my laser crocs, but they bring up another attack wave literally 20 seconds after that. A double layer of walls seemed to have helped, but the plan to have walls on all 4 choke points might have been a bit too ambitious. So I let the furthest ones die, and I made 2 large walls a bit closer to home. And once I managed to reach critical mass in crocodiles, it was time to assault the tree's defenders. I decided to make walls around the tree because it does take a while to take it down, and the enemy is just relentless on this level. At one point I even got ambushed by an attack wave, so I had to use my eclipse power to increase my crocodile's attack, and surprisingly I managed to beat the ambush wave with no casualties. After that I made more walls, but I decided that the best thing to do would be to have somebody soak my shots. And instead of building towers, I built a huge fort. I'm done playing games. The crocodiles took down another 2 attack waves, while the workers did their part in polluting the environment by deforestation. But at least they managed to accomplish something meaningful. Power to the workers. What a giant mess this level was. A gigantic elephant mess. To be honest, the last level was a complete slog, and it wasn't fun at all. Thankfully, the next level is the complete opposite. I start with a bunch of soldiers, and I have to rescue the people on the beach. The enemy has a fair amount of units defending the place, so I use my bronze powers on my soldiers to make them so shiny that the enemies are blinded and can't hit them at all. The guys I saved turned out to be some kind of cult that worships colossi, and honestly I can't blame them, because colossi are awesome. They're gonna be producing a couple of them every once in a while. And every little bit helps, especially if that little bit is big and shiny with a sword. In the meantime I board my units onto 2 pirate ships and I move them through this giant enemy canal without a scratch. Before I retire the boats though, I'm going to put a worker onto one of them and bring it back to the cultists. This worker is going to the small lake in the south of the map. I can fish there without a single worry in the world. In the meantime, I made 2 wall layers and took out a couple of attack waves. They had no siege units, so I just took them out with my ranged units. After that, I built a transport bird who can transport workers towards the island that has a lot of gold on it, and it can also be used to transport the finished colossi back to my base. After the initial couple of waves, the enemy actually didn't attack me at all. I guess they wanted me to come to them. And that is exactly what I did. I used my heroes and catapult and slowly pushed towards the top. In the meantime, I unlocked my last tier of god powers by worshipping Osiris, and he gives me access to his secret power, a freaking son of Osiris. You know that insane lightning guy from the first level? It's time for a payback, with interests, and boy is it a payback. Turns out this guy can destroy whole planets. By the way, I had a problem where if I attacked the enemy, they would come right after me, so the solution I came up with is building walls inside the enemy base. Noobs proxy towers, real chads proxy walls. And right on cue, Pigman arrives. I managed to bait him with my heroes to come closer into the lightning range, and then I clean him up with the rest of my units. And now it's time to take this guy down. Remember, the giant fish are gone. He can't escape now. It was an epic fight, but we did it. Pigman is dead. And now it's time to assemble the Forbidden One. Here we have yet another level where we start with 2 bases that aren't connected. Interestingly enough, there are only a couple of trees in between them, so I told my workers to chop them down. Connecting my bases is much more important than the environment. After that, I started making walls right next to the future town center and towers. The initial couple of waves weren't that hard to deal with, but I decided to make another layer of walls for extra protection. And that's right when the enemies start sending out attack waves that have a handful of siege towers. And those siege towers really hurt. Unfortunately, the enemy builds a bunch of archers, so I can't bring melee guys to take them down. I have to wait for the archers to die and hope I still have some infrastructure left before I go to town with the siege towers. In the first level, we've learned that the enemy siege units take more damage from workers. Back then, I was assaulted by a bunch of siege towers and I was too afraid to face them. But I'm not afraid anymore. It's time for group worker harassment. The level starting locations lack gold, so I somehow had to take the gold mine on the outside of the base. I use the gold to make elephants because they are super durable and I can easily deal with the siege towers the enemy attacks with. And soon after, Arkentos arrives with a solid army that's gonna be helpful in the future. After that, I advance to the last tier of units in order to make Avengers, aka spinning swordbirds. They aren't the strongest units, but they sure are deadly in large numbers. And a large number of units is exactly what I ended up with in the end. I used Arkantos' army to pincer the enemy from the north, and then I used my army of Avengers to deal with the south of the enemy base. I even used the tornado power to deal with a certain mummy that can insta-kill my Avengers. And that's it. In the end, I just had to bring all the pieces of the Forbidden One together, and now it's time for him to awaken.
Hadouken!
The Forbidden One called down a shower of meteors and obliterated the rest of the Cyclops King's army. Unfortunately, he managed to flee north, which is where we are heading next. But first, we need to make a little stop along the way. This last level is a bit of a cheat in this video, since you don't really play as Egyptians here. To be fair, you don't even play as humans here, you play as pigs. Well, at least until you get to the second part of the level. But hey, one of the pigs was an Egyptian priest. So technically you do play as Egyptians here after all. I mean Egyptian, singular, but it is what it is. Zeus's temple turned all pigs into people. I didn't have a princess who kissed me and turned me into a human, but I guess princesses don't kiss pigs, just frogs. After transforming, we were basically halfway there. I built an armory to reach the next tier of units, and I told my soldiers to go north so I don't lose them. They were pretty bored though, so they started attacking unarmed workers. I mean, nothing like a little war crime to brighten your day. Although to be fair, the Geneva Convention didn't even exist back then, so it's all legit. After my daily dose of war crimes, I built a fort. There were a couple of attempts to do that, but they resulted in quite weird bugs. But in the end, I managed to build a couple of catapults to destroy the main objective. I even walled myself in to be completely safe, which turned out to be a very good decision. When the enemy fort got to half health, the evil sorceress that turned me into a pig appeared, and before she could do more harm, I did harm to her using my lightning strike. Soon after, the fort itself fell, and that's it. The Egyptian campaign is over without losing a single unit. This makes 2 campaigns that I managed to beat Deathless. Unfortunately, those were the 2 easier ones, which tells you enough about the road ahead of us. The next one is the Norse campaign. God help me. I mean, Odin help me. But we need to stop the enemy from making Kraken, and we also need to take revenge on the evil Cyclops King. So it doesn't matter how hard it's gonna be, it has to be done. Thank you all for watching. If you liked the video, smash like, subscribe, whatever. Every little bit will help boost my morale when it inevitably gets shattered in the Norse campaign. If you want to see me play this or other challenge runs level by level with commentary, check out my other channel called Amon's Logs. I'll put the link in the description below. Once again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in Norway, and maybe other Scandinavian countries. Peace!